Welcome to the Wooper Club League Season 10 post-draft analysis. My name is Nate. I'm coach of the Buffalo Bouffalant. I am joined, as always, by Steve, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets.
I'm back.
As well as Michael, coach of the Route 1 Birbs.
I'm still here. I slept in the studio, so they couldn't kick me out.
As much as we try, he's still here. So we are in Season 10. We reached double digits, fellas. This is very cool, very exciting. We had just a pretty successful draft here. Now, we usually, in the even number seasons, kind of have a more typical draft league, but Steve, we decided to do low tiers this season. Tell us about that process. What does that mean? What does that entail for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite simple. For those who've been following the league, we've been using a point system, 200 to 20 points, 10 tiers, so to give more customization options. And for this season, just everything tier 120 and above is banned, is not allowed. Only using Pokemon in tier 100 or below. So you're looking, at Pokemon who in the singles, would be around NU, maybe a little bit of RU. I guess, there's some outliers and lower. So it's rather restricted format, and we'll see what everyone's able to come up with this limited pool of Pokemon.
It definitely is pros and cons here. If you're sick of seeing those top tiers, no more. But perhaps there are some of those that you want to try out because they're just so good. We don't really have those options available to us. So, Michael, what did that mean the draft looked like? I know you had a lot of fun with a lot of snipes going on as you had the 10th overall pick. What did you kind of see as the drafting strategy around? What are we seeing out of the low-tier drafting process?
I think a lot of people's strategy devolved very quickly into panic. It was a pretty chaotic draft. I think everyone pretty quickly realized that the pool of Pokemon, it's not just, what you're used to, but worse. There are some types and roles that just don't the viability of those different roles, some just have very few answers, and I think a lot of people ended up going with very suboptimal or even skipping out on some, considered pretty core aspects of a normal draft.
No, I, for one, missed out on 2/3 of the traditional Firewater Grass core. Just absolutely chaotic by the end there, where we kind of threw our hands up and said, you know what? The bottom tiers, maybe they don't matter as much, and we're just going to have fun with some of these big hitters. I wonder if offense or defense is going to take the cake here. That'll definitely be interesting for sure. Before we actually get into the actual drafts then, Steve, what are your thoughts here? What are you looking to see from the low-tier league?
I'm excited to see some of these mons that don't typically get to shine do so. The tier 100 mons, they sometimes can shine, but, in this environment, they will be able to, excel. There are a couple mons, never been drafted before, but they went real early this time because with all of the usual checks and counters removed, they have their chance right here, right now.
And to Michael's point, too, a lot of these lower tier mons tend to be picked in regular draft as just kind of a niche counter use once or twice here or there. And this time we're expected to bring these mons quite often. Michael, before we hop into it, what are your thoughts? What are you expecting to see out of this draft?
I'm looking forward to, I think, some very atypical team building and some games. I definitely think this is going to be a season where you can't necessarily really check or answer some of the threats on your opponent's teams. I think it's going to be a real big focus on positioning, a real good focus on identifying and sustaining your win conditions. I think it's going to lead to some pretty interesting matches.
And to that point, too, it seems like there is a lot less cohesion to everyone's strategies. We saw a lot of the weather users banned from Tier 100 to kind of limit just focusing around one singular strategy that may just be a little too powerful. So with this all said, let's move on to the number one pick in the draft overall. This was randomly generated to be the Akron Aggrons, coached by Joey. A long-time staple of the league, still trying to get that next step in, and we just finished up Season 9, and he was actually a finalist there, continuously getting better. Let's see what he came up with here. His first overall pick we have to go over here is that Slurpuff. what an absolute beast. This thing can run Calm Mind, it can run Belly Drum, it can run Sticky Webs, does everything you might need it to do. Joining it in the Tier 100, Bronzong, Moltres, you also see Excelgor, Hitmontop kind of there at the top. We see Lantern, Cragnole, Sandslash, Turtonator, Stone Dritter, and the Baby Monkey Thwacky, which Joey is known for. We've got, I see overall kind of a bulky team with some sweepers. It looks like the main goal of this is to break things down for Slurpuff. We see some of those higher tier hazard setters with Bronzong and Excelgor being able to do that for it. Although it seems like things aren't necessarily quite threatening at first. So I would like to see Joey maybe play a slower game of breaking his opponent's team down before something like Slurpuff can really go in and shine. We've got okay hazards. Again, most of those are at the top there. It seems like maybe a lot of pressure on something like Bronzong to set rocks if you want that reliably. Lots of spinners. We know Joey was a little critical of his rock weakness there too. Decent priority, just okay momentum. So overall, I think very balanced, but overall leaning more on the bulky side. And we're going to turn over next to Steve to look at some of these stats on Joey's team. What do we got?
Yeah, so Joey's base stats throughout are fairly average. His special attack is one of the lowest. Average special attack is one of the lowest in the league. However, he does have a couple big hitters, especially Moltres at tier 100, that's really carrying his special attack. And with Moltres at the top there, that could be enough. It'll also kind of disincentivize teams bringing Assault Vest at him, making Moltres shine even more. Outside of that, overall fairly average. For his speed, he has a little bit of a speed gap between his fastest two mons of Excelgor and Cragnole, just 40 points. But after that, it's fairly well spaced, 105 down to 90, 80, 72. It gets a little clumped around the 70s with 5 mons in the 65 to 72 range. And then after that, drops it down to the 30s. Of course, there is also Slurpuff with Unburden, which will jump that 72 base speed into sweeping numbers. So decent spread, a little bit of clumping it towards the bottom, a couple of small gaps, but all in all, pretty good base stat spread.
I think we're going to see a lot of that too. A lot of those high speed mods were taken pretty early in the draft, which forced a lot of us to end up clumping up in those 60s. That's going to become a much more important speed tier than we had originally anticipated, I believe. Michael, what are we seeing on the typing side?
Yeah, his team's pretty solid typing-wise. He's got a net weakness to ghost types, rock types, and water types, but he's got some pretty decent resistances and stuff covering a lot of those. Really, he's got to look out for the water and rock weaknesses, even if he's got enough spinners to maybe not be weak to stealth rock. Rock-type moves could still do him in. Something interesting I thought, though, was that Lantern probably running Water Absorb a lot more than Volt Absorb this season, having only one resist outside of this potential Lantern immunity in Water, as where in Electric he already has another immunity and 2 resists. So I usually think of Lantern running Volt Absorb, but maybe not on Joey's team.
I think either way it pairs well with that Moltres, but definitely a great point there on getting a water immunity to help supplement that, even just a little bit more for something that seems to be a little bit lacking. So we're going to kind of take a look overall at Joey's team. This is pretty solid, honestly. That Slurpuff, I really see everything coming together around that Slurpuff, whether it's going to be setting up the sticky webs for a couple other mons to really break through, whether it's belly drumming up itself. That needs to be the main focus of the team, and if Joey plays around that well, I think we could see some great success. Do either of you two have anything you'd like to say about Joey's team, who picked first overall, before we move on?
I'm excited to see Slurpuff paired with Baby Rillaboom. We all know Joey is a huge Rillaboom fan simply because I think he drafted it like twice in a row and then it became a meme. But otherwise, being able to, instead of needing to set up a belly drum, you could also, use a seed and proceed to activate Unburden that way, as well as just, see what the baby monkey can do.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I have to agree on having a terrain setter with an incredible unburdened Pokemon like Slurpuff. Real interesting. I'm also interested to see with his plethora of hazard removal, does he settle into a favorite, or do we see a rapid spin going on and coming off a variety of Pokemon throughout the weeks?
It'll be interesting to see if he pivots away from running boots on Moltres all the time, too. How confident is he going to be that he can remove those hazards with ease with all those different spinners in particular, not even just defog? Overall, Joey, a very good, strong performer in the regular season. Maybe Slurpuff will net him a few wins just by merit of being Slurpuff. Next up, number 2 overall pick. It is our buddy Steve of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets here, and you picked Chandelure first overall. Very strong one, 145 special attack in a format that we've already kind of hinted doesn't have that much in the way of special attack, so super solid pickup, great offensive typings as well. The name of the game here is offense, offense, offense. If you see the Sharpedo that he followed it up with here, also in Tier 100, speed boost, flip turn, physical offense, special offense, everything that you really want or need from a mon is right here. We've also got the Escavalier, Piloswine, Virizion, Archeops, Drampa, Licky Licky, Charjabug, Dracloak, and Kling Klang at the bottom. This is such a powerful team. Again, offense really seems to be the name of the game, though the top is actually pretty well balanced with a couple of the bulkier mons in Tier 80, Escavalier and Piloswine. I'm looking at those in particular. Very strong top-of-the-line Fire-Water Grass Core, too, with Chandelure, Sharpedo, Virizion. Very nice complements to each other in terms of typing. I especially see that Chandelure, Virizion doing well for each other. Virizion taking some of those rock hits and dark hits that Chandelure may not like to see. We see maybe a little bit light on the hazards and the removal, but we've got awesome priority. We've got really high speed, great priority from, especially I see the Sharpedo and Piloswine providing a lot of that. And decent momentum here from top to bottom as well. And the flip turn stands out to me on Sharpedo, and some of the lower mons have some nice momentum moves there too to make it well worth his time to bring. Steve, when you look at your team and your stats, what stands out to you?
You mentioned the offense, and that also stands out in the base stats. The Wobbuffets have the highest average attack and special attack in the league, which probably just means the unused attacking stat from a lot of my mons is artificially higher than it needs to be. But I'll take it and run with it. Otherwise, in the bulk department, again, not all that great. I'm looking at my team mostly relying on Eviolite for a lot of the bulk, but towards the bottom for HP defense and special defense. Middle of the pack for speed. Looking at my speed tiers, they're pretty decent. My fast end is not fantastic, only up to 110 and 108 with Archeops and Virizion. But after that, it's a pretty gradual and slow decline. 102, 95, 90, 80. That's pretty good. However, that whole 70, 60 speed tier we were talking about, where everyone's got a lot of picks, I have 0. Go straight from 80 down to 50, and then from there, trickle down to 20. It's the top end, pretty good speed tiering. However, that middle tier kind of missing really could come to bite me, as mons in that tier can just ignore speed more or less and focus more on bulk.
That is true. That kind of is the big impact of those 60s, is maybe they have to run speed, but maybe they still don't have to against you as well. One more thing to bring up with those speeds, although yes, 110 is your speed cap, Sharpedo with speed boost, running Protect, just one turn, getting a +1 Sharpedo for almost free. Really, really scary and threatening. Michael, we talked about the Firewater Grass Core up top. What else do you see in terms of types from the Wobbuffets?
I mean, he's got a lot of good resistances. Bug, electric, grass, normal, poison, steel. He's got a lot of good answers to a lot of types, but I think the big thing to look at is the weaknesses. Net weakness to fairy, a net weakness to rock, a net weakness to fighting, but some of those are just very busy. He's got 4 weaknesses to fairy, 5 to fighting, 4 to fire, one of them being ×4. He's got 4 weaknesses to ice. So even if, he's got a lot of resists to compensate for those, it's going to be really interesting seeing how he plays around and shuffles a lot of his Pokemon. I know some of that was intentional, things like building up a fire and fighting weakness to get free Chandelure switch-ins. I think it'd be really fun to see how he makes some great predictions and plays.
Definitely, and a couple of these weaknesses, Rock in particular, I see with a little bit light on the hazard removal, could be very interesting to try and play around. Looking at the team top to bottom, We emphasize the offense, but it seems like it may be a little bit risky. This is going to be a very fun team to watch for sure. One bad switch could put you very far behind, but one great switch is going to put you so far ahead. These I expect to be very fun, fast matches that are going to be an absolute blast to watch. Steve, you picked the Chandelure first. This is your team. Tell us a little bit about what you're thinking, what you're expecting.
I'm definitely excited to use the team and kind of work around some of the flaws and both the weaknesses and obviously the hazard situation. But very much looking forward to it. Looking forward to being able to kind of lean a little more offensively and hopefully break through teams quickly while having a strong pivot game.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We see a lot of Eviolites in these lower tiers, but also a lot of just fragile mons that couldn't quite cut it in the top tiers, so maybe you're going to be able to take advantage of that? It'll be very interesting to see. Michael, any closing thoughts before we move on?
No, I think the Pokemon I'm most excited from Steve's team is Virizion. Definitely gets left out of the conversation in normal drafts compared to the other Swords of Justice. I'm really looking forward to seeing what it can do.
Yeah, surprising speed stat paired with a surprisingly high special defense stat. I think the mon that stands out for me I'm excited to see is that Piloswine. I love this thing. Eviolite with very good stab moves, surprisingly good bulk even without the Eviolite, and Ice Shard to boot. That thing is going to be very cool. We're going to move on to, of course, number 3 overall, your Buffalo Bouffalant, picking Aerodactyl third as the fast mon on the team up there at base 130, something with Dragon Dance or Hone Claws, or maybe go a little defensive. I don't know. I'm considering playing around with the Aerodactyl a little bit. Overall, I see a kind of balanced team, and we definitely see at the top a lot of utility coming out of the top picks here. Aside from the Aerodactyl, these aren't exactly mons that you're going to see come out and threaten a sweep, but perhaps threaten some key mons and get off some key moves. I see a lot of utility, especially from, say, Tentacruel with Rapid Spin and Knockoff, Mesprit, probably the mon I'm most excited to use in this draft with the Knockoff, the U-Turn, going around there. Passimian with a strong U-turn. Steelix is an awesome defensive wall and rock setter, among other things. Going down the list, we of course have Frostlass, Rotom Frost, Clawitzer, Guzzlord, Clang, and Marowak. So a good bit of power and utility all throughout the roster is something that I tried to emphasize quite a bit on this draft. Decent typing all around. Of course, we'll get to that in a little bit. A lot of hazards, honestly, that it may not have the most hazards out of anyone, but I see a lot of my higher tier threats having those hazards and removal. The Rapid Spin from Tentacruel, I think, was key to help with that. We've got okay priority, but also, honestly, some very good momentum to see a lot of U-turners, some Volt switching coming from Rotom Frost, and even the Clang. Excited to see that Clawitzer pull something out there too. I enjoyed the team that I was able to put together. I've been kind of leaning more towards a bulky offensive style, and hopefully this kind of lends itself to my play style well. But Steve will tell you about the stats here next. What do you got?
Well, Nate was able to do it, drafting the highest average base stat total, and as a result, his average stats are looking good. Second highest average defense, third highest HP. Of course, those are carried by some key members in Guzzlord and Steelix. But all in all, everything else is floating right around average. Looking at the speed tiers, Aerodactyl, of course, up top at 130 with a little bit of a jump down to 110, but especially with such a limited mons in that gap, that's fine. Down to 100, 86, couple 80s. So a little bit of gap around 90, but 14 points is manageable. Big gap down to 59. Again, missing out on that kind of 70 range and just underspeeding the 60s. And then rolling all the way down to 30. All in all, pretty good speed tiers. A couple of gaps that might be able to be exploited. But overall, very good.
Yep, that's the reason why I focus on the 60s, 70s. I feel like that could bite me in the butt a little bit there, too. It's going to be interesting to see some maybe more defensively minded mons in the 60s and how they compare to, say, my 59, 45, 43 speed mons, and see if maybe I'll end up being able to speed creep out of those, or if people are going to be mindful enough to put speed in that, knowing that I may not bring that either. Can be some fun mind games there. Michael, what do you see as far as typing goes? I know I'm missing quite a few types defensively. Interested to see how this pans out.
Yeah, I mean, defensively speaking, you're not too bad off. I mean, you've got a net weakness to Ghost, which is hard to fix in a regular draft, let alone low tier, and a little bit of a weakness to fighting. But aside from that, you've got some types like dark, fire, grass, ground, water, where you've got as many weaknesses as you have resists, so they might be somewhat spammable against you, but you seem to have a decent number of answers to a lot of those types. Really, really like your relation to ground with your 3 weaknesses and 3 immunities. I think that'll lead to some pretty fun predictions for you throughout the season.
Absolutely, and I liked being able to get multiple ice types yet again, and that actually leads to a pretty nice ice resist, which I feel like is pretty uncommon. Those 2 types I definitely want to focus on a little bit more, ice and ground, for being able to resist both of them. That's pretty tough. So overall, again, I said the name of the game was Utility. I'd like to think a came through on that, but team building's been very interesting so far, trying to figure out what to do with these bonds. Definitely feeling the strain of some of the lower tiers over here. But I really like the team. Again, I've mentioned Mesprit is probably the one I'm most excited to use. These pretty high base stats and very malleable to what I would like it to be. I think that's going to be true for quite a few mons on the team. Steve, any thoughts?
Yeah, before the draft started, we were talking about Aerodactyl being such a big threat, and we'll certainly see how it plays out. The ability to set up with Dragon Dance, and then the combinations of Dual Wing Beat and your choice of Rock Slide or Stone Edge, depending on your tolerance for missing. Fantastic. Very few resists for the combination of those, especially if you throw in Earthquake for coverage. Fantastic. A way to just clean up teams at the end. Will definitely be a presence to reckon with.
And Michael, anything else before we move on?
Yeah, I could definitely see Aerodactyl contending for kill leader this season. But I think, I'm excited to see what you do with this team. I think there's a lot of tricky things you could do with it. I think, everyone's looking at that Aerodactyl as the big threat, but Mesprit, Guzzlord, Clawitzer, maybe even Marowak, I think you could do some tricky, sneaky things with this team, and maybe won't see them until playoffs, but, I'd be excited to see him eventually.
Not helping my effort to undersell the Aerodactyl, but I do appreciate the acknowledgement nonetheless. We're going to move on to the 4th overall pick, and that is going to be the Close Combat Club, coached by John. His first pick, 4th overall, was Porygon Z. What an absolute bomb in a format like this. We saw something similar with the Chandelure, but Chandelure does not have adaptability to boost that normal type stab to insane levels, or download to potentially boost that into that and other moves into insane territory. Porygon Z is absolutely a nuke, and I think definitely deserved a first round pick. Overall, John's team, I see just straightforward threats. I don't think there's that much creativity to be had. There's a little bit, but I don't know how effective it's going to be in terms of just straightforward what they're going to do. Porygon Z, of course, can set up or have a choice item, but that's about as far as it goes. Machamp, very straightforward. Jellicent's going to sit there and be annoying. Registeel's going to sit there and be annoying. Going down the list, we've got Garbodor, Persian Alola, Xatu, Clefairy, Exeggutor, Alola, Manectric, and the Wishy-Washy. A lot of single-type threats. We're going to see how that plays out with the type chart in a little bit here. But very overall straightforward team as far as I can tell. Big power and big defense up top is what I see for sure. Porygon Z and Machamp, straightforward, but you better have an answer ready for these two. And Jellicent and Registeel, good luck breaking through one of these, let alone both of them. Absolute painful to try and deal with. Very strong up top for sure. If you know what's coming, maybe it'll be easier to deal with, but good luck with that, honestly. This is going to be very tricky to work around. Decent hazard play too. I know he picked up that Garbodor pretty early in the draft to try and get some spike support to help out that Porygon Z, as well as a nice fighting resist. It goes along with the Jellicent there pretty well too. Though I do see very low on removal. That Xatu is picked up early too, and it's going to be very fun to see how well he can use that and play around some of the hazard game that we know is going to be coming his way. We've got a little bit of priority, but I think maybe the strength here is there's a lot of momentum in the lower tiers here too. A lot of tricky little baton pass and teleport tricks that he could potentially pull out to get that Porygon Z in safely a little bit more often, and that could be very fun to see him just drop in a nuke and say, pick a sack, because that appears to be the game plan here. Steve, what do you see as far as overall stats from top to bottom?
So John's team has some of the lower stats. Of course, this can be very subject to which wishy-washy we're looking at, as the stats there vary dramatically. But outside of that, assuming the smaller form, but of course it'll be bigger form to start, attack and defense are lowest in the league. Special defense is towards the bottom. But, with that tier 20 bringing it up, it changes dramatically in his favor. Special attack is one of the better ones in the league with average HP and speed. So all in all, not bad. His speed tiers are also pretty good. 115, 105, 95, 90, 75, 60, 55, 50, 45, 40, 35. No gaps more than 15. A little bit of a gap between 75 and 60, where we said there's going to be a lot of mons falling. A little bit on the slower end with a lot of the lower speeds and only having 4 mons, 90 or above. But all in all, very workable. Nice gradual pacing all the way down to 35. We'll have options to outspeed threats regardless of their speed.
It's definitely interesting here, the special attack tilt of the team. Those, again, we've talked about this, seem to be a little bit rare in the format. It seems like John's nabbed up quite a few of them. Wonder how that's going to influence his eventual matchups here. Michael, we talked about the monotype tilt of the team too. What does that lend to the matchup, the type spread here? What are we seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what you'd expect. It's not great, it's not bad. He's got a couple slight weaknesses to electric, fairy, and ground, but they're not huge, and he's got, some resistances to a variety of types, but he's not particularly deep in those resistances. He's got, a good number of types where he's got, maybe 1 or 2 weaknesses and 1 or 2 resists. So I definitely think the name of the game for John is going to be figuring out how to sustain his team and, really getting in a strong position before things get worn down, because he might not have that many answers to a Pokemon once it gets going. So he's going to be needing to watch out for getting broken by key threats.
I think that's definitely fair, and that is going to definitely lead into that momentum train that I brought up a little bit earlier. Being able to pivot out with things like that Persian Alola with the Xatu, and finding those opportunities to set up the spikes or stealth rocks when he can, I think are going to be crucial, because, as he said, I don't think he's going to have that many turns to bring those out. But if he can get them up at the right times, Machamp is primed to break just about any team out there. Porygon Z, I think, can break literally any team out there, and those are strong threats to work around. That'll be kind of interesting to see how he can bring those out safely and how he can make them work. Steve, what do you see from this team?
You guys have pretty adequately described what this team does. I think what I'm most looking forward to with this team is seeing if the wishy-washy at tier 20 proves to be too much for the tier. Those slow flip turns coming off of the base 140 attack really could rack in quite a bit of damage, while also switching in his key sweepers of, Machamp and Porygon Z to finish breaking things through. It might only get, 2 to 3 of those, maybe just 1 per game with, hazards and chip damage, but that could be enough to turn the tide.
Yeah, definitely an interesting Mon down at 20. I was heavily looking at that for a lot of the draft, and John very, very smartly able to grab that. It seems to fit extremely well with the team style, as we've already mentioned here. Michael, anything else? What are you looking forward to about this team before we move on?
I'm looking forward to see how people prepare for Porygon Z, because a lot of people's normal matchups are decent, but not a lot of people grabbed real solid ghost types, and, a lot of the other normal resists tend to be physically defensive and not specially. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what strategies people come up to deal with it.
I wonder what kinds of Assault Vests, maybe even some Rachillin berries. This would be kind of interesting, and maybe John's going to end up playing around that very well too. Everything seems to revolve around that Mon, as well as his top walls there too. So we're going to move on to the 5th pick, and that is the Cleveland Castforms, coached by Fish, coming right back here. And his first pick, I love Vikavolt. What a very cool Mon. The 3rd straight coach with a very high special attack Mon. This one a little bit slower than the others, but I think a little more versatility with some very interesting resistances a la Chandelure, but also some utility with things like Sticky Web, able to help supplement the rest of the team. And as we take a look at the team starting to go down a little bit here, Gastrodon, Diancie, Miltank, we're definitely seeing a defensive backbone being built here. Moving on down through Cursula, Flapple, Dugtrio, Lola, Phalanx, Mr. Mime, Galar, Pukamuku, and the Regigigas at the bottom. Boy, does the defensive backbone of this team look strong. Just checking out those first 4 picks. Gastrodon, its weakness is grass. You've got a couple more resistances there. Vikavolt resisting, and Miltank with Sap Sipper coming in potentially to help absorb those up. Vikavolt, look at all those weaknesses it has. Fire, rock. Gastrodon's going to cover those. Diancie's going to cover those. Miltank's going to cover those. What's Diancie weak to? Steel, ground. Oh, we got that covered too. This is honestly a super solid Tier 100, Tier 80 core that he's got built here defensively. And if he can switch around this effectively, oh my goodness, will this be obnoxious. Gastrodon with Recover, Vikavolt with Roost, Miltank with Milk Drink. Watch out. You're not going to be able to break through this quite as easily as you thought. Miltank with Heal Bell, Diancie with Heal Bell. Oh my goodness, this could be an absolute nightmare to deal with. Got plenty of hazards here too. Mentioned the Sticky Webs. Got rocks from a couple of those top threats too, Diancie and Miltank, even if Gastrodon doesn't provide them. Very low on removal though, so that could potentially be the way to help break down all of this offense. Decent priority here, minimal momentum, but honestly doesn't need too much if you've got these big giant threats to swap into. Steve, do the stats reflect that or something similar to it?
The stats most definitely do. Having the second highest average special attack and special defense, along with the 4th attack and defense, lots there in the offense and the defense. And where the team's lacking is, of course, the average speed and HP. A lot of those mons being more defensive and not necessarily, especially the lower tier picks, having the HP to back it up. With, of course, the exception of the big man Regigigas. Overall, the speed tiers are very grouped. We got Dugtrio at 110, followed by 3 mons at 100. And then there's a 25-point drop down to 75, 70. Another 20 points down, 50, and then a couple more. Going, of course, 30 from Cursula down to 5 for Pukamuku for another 25-point speed gap that probably doesn't matter at this point.
Very interesting.
All in all, though, yeah, lots of gaps, lots of opportunity to kind of speed for many mons, and in some cases, you just don't need the speed and just invest in bulk.
This is a unique team amongst them all, and I really do like this. I mentioned some of those groupings at the top with the typings. How does it look overall?
So I think, like you said, he's got a lot of bulk and a lot of recovery, so the fact that he doesn't have a whole lot of deep resist to a lot of types, I'm not sure how much that's going to matter. He's got, a slight weakness to ground, a slight weakness to fighting, a slight weakness to fairy, some neutralities besides that. But, can the sheer stats and recovery make up for that? Maybe. I think the Miltank especially is going to be crucial, though, able to bring Sap Sipper to cover for the terrible weakness on Gastrodon, but also for the fire weaknesses on Vikavolt, Dugtrio, and Mr. Mime, as well as the ice weakness on Flapple. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what he chooses to prioritize there with the Miltank.
Definitely, and going from the overall picture, yes, the top is full of these big walls, but I'm kind of interested to see how well he's going to use some of these mid-tier picks. You mentioned that Flapple, I think, is his only ice weakness here. I wonder if he can possibly get that in and start putting in a lot of work there. The Dugtrio and the Phalanx have the opportunity to break some holes in there, too, that maybe he needs just a little bit of a push in order to help those top-tier walls to get through. It's going to be a very interesting team to watch. I wonder, as you said, the Miltank is a very interesting one to me. I'm curious to see how well he'll use some of those other pieces. The Diancie stands out a little bit there, too. If he's going to be tricky with things like Trick Room or whatnot. Steve, what stands out to you then?
What especially stands out to me is just the special offense from his top 4 picks, outside of the Miltank, I guess. But the Cursula, the Diancie, the Vikavolt, Gastrodon, all of them hitting very hard on the special side. Very unique. Most of the teams, of course, being physically leaning, will definitely present different styles of gameplay.
And I wonder how much people will be able to use an Assault Vest if they have to find other means to break down those walls. That's going to make for a bit of a conundrum for a lot of coaches, I think. Michael, any other thoughts then before we move along?
This might be the team Maybe it's not the team I'm most excited about, but it definitely is the most Pokemon I'm excited about. Pyukumuku, I mean, it's tier 40 and not tier 20, so it's got to do something besides be Taunt Fate. Regigigas, who knew now? I mean, who knows if that's going to work out? I think Galarian Mr. Mime is fun. I think, potential Sandforce, Alolan Doug trio, if he, decides to get cheeky. Corsola with, a huge special attack and weak armor to maybe get a little faster. Hustle Flapple, Phalanx getting an Omni boost, and Vikavolt. There's just so many fun things we could see everywhere.
For sure. I know Mr. Mime Galar's kind of a joke, but hey, the lower tiers Nasty Plot, it's a thing. Flapple hits so hard. If you get a little bit creative, we could see some very fun results from this team, for sure. So we've seen kind of the defensive team here. It's time to go on to the number 6 pick, the Mighty Miltanks, coached by Tony. And as noted by that first pick, Tyrantrum, this is the offensive team counterpart to the defensive team that we had just seen. Tyrantrum, Zoroark, Copperajah, Scyther, Toxcroak, Articuno, Omastar, Dusclops, Flareon, Whiscash, and the non-Shadow Tag Wobbuffet at the bottom. Stop me if you find a non-offensive mon here aside from Dusclops. Oh my goodness, is this team just top to bottom filled with heavy hitters. This is ridiculous to see, especially at the top. Tyrantrum, Zoroark, Copperajah, Scyther. What are you switching into this? The offense is insane here. It's so cool. I think my biggest takeaway from those top mons is being able to see Zoroark disguise itself as something else. Zoroark is something that very much not only benefits from something that it wants to copy for a defensive switch, be able to maybe trick someone to using a psychic or ghost move into its resisted body, but also very much benefits from mons that force switches into moves that Zoroark will then use. And as we see a lot of physically offensive pieces, something like a big old Dark Pulse from Zoroark is going to put in a ton of work if you're trying to swap in your Tyrantromancer into something like a Dark Pulse, which will let that Tyrantrum wreck house later. He's going to be able to break holes through teams better than just about anybody else, I think. Mediocre hazards, though, to be honest, the Copperajah is maybe the best answer for being able to get some of those hazards out, and very much weak on removal here, too. The only two mons that are removal pieces are Quad weak to Stealth Rock and force him to run Boots along with that, potentially. We've got okay priority and decent momentum, too. But the story is that offense up on the top. I think the first mons that he picked really, I think, defined the rest of the team there. The rest of it is support to try and get those things out. Steve, what do you see about the stats? How offensive is this team?
Yeah, offense. Second highest average attack. Tons of offense there. We're talking about even the special attacker Zoroark carrying a 105 attack. Tons of offense there. Also, surprisingly, well, maybe not with the Wobbuffet, highest average HP. Lots of HP behind it all, although not necessarily the defense or speed to back it up. Speaking of speed and the speed tiers, one of the slowest teams in the league. Scyther and Zoroark are at 105, and then there's a 20-point jump down to a couple 85s, another 14-point jump down to 71, 65, 60, 55, and then 30 and below. Kind of missing anything above 110, leaving a lot of room to be outsped. Also missing a lot of that 90 to 100 area. Very much gaps that can be exploited by certain teams. But then again, doesn't matter if they have to keep switching into giant attacks.
Yeah, and you mentioned the giant HP pool overall, definitely indicative of that Copperajah as well. As definitely what I think of when I think of just big HP, low defenses, low speed, but a monstrous attack. As you said, good luck switching into it, and if he could just tank one hit and then hit you back and get a KO, maybe that's a trade that this team is willing to take. Michael, what do you see about typings that may help it out?
Well, help it out, not a whole lot. He's got a pretty glaring weakness to ground with 5 weaknesses, 2 immunities, and no resist. Slight overall weakness to ghost and electric as well, and 6 other types that he has as many resists as he does weaknesses, and a lot of those types, there aren't many of either there. So there's fairly spammable types in Dragon, in Fairy, in Water. I think defensively, he's got a bit of an uphill battle, but, if your team is all offense, you don't really care, because your goal is to not even have to fight that battle.
So true. I definitely like the Tyrantrum pickup here first and foremost. We moved things, couple things down that weren't picked. I think of the Pangoro as just a purely offensive mon that wasn't even picked. But Tyrantrum we kept in tier 100, and I think Tony's kind of seeing why with just the devastating power of something like a Rockhead Head Smash. We talk about Rock all the time as being a very tough type to resist. Tyrantrum paired with something like a Zoroark, that's an offensive duo I definitely do not feel like facing. Thank you very much. Steve, what do you think about this team?
We've mentioned it, all offense. I'm quite excited to see the Omastar. It was something I was looking at, being able to take a Shell Smash along with Weak Armor, pair it with, say, a Power Herb Meteor Beam, and turn kind of this unsuspecting 55 speed with a quite usable 115 special attack into a sweeping monster. Really hoping it's able to do some cool stuff this season.
There are quite a few Shell Smashers that were not picked up. I look at Barbarcle in particular as maybe someone's a little bit desperate later in the season and they think, screw it, I'm going to go for it. And we see the power of Shell Smash. Great call out on that Omastar then there as maybe the only thing that we see picked up that has that kind of sweeping potential. Michael, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, same. I'm really excited to see a Tyrantrum and an Omastar set up and absolutely wreck some teams.
Rock is a strong offensive type for those of you unaware. We're moving on to the second half of the draft now, and we're going to go over to, I believe, the first coach not to pick a tier 100 in the first round, as Matt and his Cincinnati Incineroar decided to opt for that Durant in round number 1. This I totally understand after looking at it just a little bit more. That 109 attack, that's pretty good, but then you look at hustle boosting it, you look at first impression and how strong that can be, you look at Ironhead and the move pool that it has to help back it up just a little bit. Wow, this thing is a monster. 109 speed definitely helps supplement all of that as well. What a fearsome monster, and for a tier 80 mon, I think I kind of understand what he was doing here, especially as we see for his tier 100s, he was still able to grab Entei and Espeon as a fearsome duo up top. Going down the list, we also have Hitmonchan, Jolteon, Quagsire, Regirock, My Baby Tangela, Drifblim, Wigglytuff, and the Cramorant. This team looks overall kind of balanced, but I think the biggest story maybe is the amount of snipes and favorites we see on here. I see my two favorite mons on here, multiple mons here that he was able to pick up just a little bit before everyone else was. We've got big hitters up top, the Entei, Espeon, Durant, lots of speed, lots of power, and he's able to supplement that pretty well with some utility and bulk in the middle and the bottom. See that Quagsire coming up. I think you've had this back in Season 8 as well, with able to recover spam just a little bit there. Regirock, one of his favorite mons, I know for sure, that monstrous physical defense stat, and able to provide some crucial rock setup for him too. The Tangle at the bottom, you already know how good Tangle is. I don't need to tell you how good Tangle is. A little bit light on hazards, got just okay removal, though maybe the Magic Bounce Espeon is going to be fun to see here too. Maybe one of the bigger things to look at is lots of strong priority. I already mentioned the first impression. Watch out for the extreme speed on Entei as well. We got a Mach Punch from Hitmonchan. We got an unburdened Drifblim too. I haven't forbid that thing go off just a little bit. And then we are a little bit light on momentum here at the end too, with just some baton pass shenanigans here and there. Overall, well-rounded team. How do the stats reflect that, Steve?
Stats of this team are overall fairly average. It has on the higher side for HP and speed, and then kind of middle of the pack stats for attack, defense, special attack, and a pretty poor special defense compared to other teams in the league. Looking at its speed stats in particular, having Jolteon with that base 130, one of the fastest mons in the game that's eligible this season. Jump down to 110, 109, 100, 85, 80, 76, 60, 50, 45, 35. Honestly, no real big gaps. You know, maybe the most concerning being the 100 to 85, 15-point gap kind of in the prime speed real estate for this draft. But outside of that, lots of solid spacing. Every Pokemon has something it could try and outspeed and has to invest in speed for. So no free EVs here.
Excellent. Again, overall, very well-balanced team. And or is that going to be reflective in the types as well, too, Michael? I see a lot of green here.
Yeah, it's not too bad. A slight weakness to rock, a slight weakness to ghost, and several types that aren't, particularly deeply resisted. But I think he's done a good job of covering, especially the important weaknesses. We see, that Durant and Tangela as his first two picks, and that fire weakness is really well covered by the rest of his draft. The grass weakness on the Quagsire also well covered. Ground for like the Jolteon and the Regirock, not covered as well, but there's certainly answers there. And so I think it definitely is better than it might initially appear, because I think he really knows what he needed to focus on, and he did.
Definitely a good call there too. And starting to look at his team a little more in depth, I do see that he's maybe a little bit more heavily on, say, the special defense side in the early draft, or in the higher tier picks, but was able to cover that up with things like Quagsire, Tangela, Regirock on defense, and as you said, able to double up on that again by covering for their weaknesses pretty effectively. It's just a very balanced team top to bottom. No gaping holes, I think, in here to exploit. So it's going to be, I think, a tough time to exploit what he's got going on here. Steve, what are your thoughts?
I'm looking at this team, and I'm trying to figure out what he's going to trade Tangela to you for. I mean, he already has Cramorant, so really tough to figure out how you're getting Tangela this season.
Well, hopefully he'll take something, right? It's a tradition at this point that added with Tangela. Come on, Matt, you got to come through for me, buddy. Michael, what do you think about the team overall?
I think it's pretty solid, and he can trade Tangela to you right after he trades Jolteon to me, because I wanted that thing so bad.
Yeah, we're not bitter about this, not even a little bit. Shout out to you, Matt. Good draft. We're going to move on then to number 8 overall, and that is going to be Chad and his Seattle Steamrollers, who took a very different approach, I must say, to everybody else here. While everybody else grabbed their Tier 100s immediately, Chad started off with his normal types, Tauros in round 1, Cinccino in round 2. Very much a known advocate for these two bonds in the lower tiers. He's used Cinccino several times, even in the last draft, which was just a regular draft. He really enjoys seeing the value of these lower tier bonds, saying these are bonds I can bring anytime, any battle, whether low tier or not, so it's a good idea to get them now. Oh, and by the way, there are plenty of tier 100 I can still get later, because if you look at the top tiers of Araquanid, Klefki, Slowking, Galar, that is disgusting. He ended up going with a lot of great offensive tools at the bottom, as well as some utility, and able to round out the team super well. So again, top to bottom, Araquanid, Klefki, Slowking, Galar, Moltres, Galar, Cinccino, Rhydon, Eldegoss, Glaceon, Tauros, Throh, and Pinsir. He seems very happy with this team, which was constructed in such a strange way. I think there are definitely some holes here, but knowing the way that Chad plays, I don't think it's going to matter all that much. I see overall bulky offense. I see the support bulky defensive pieces at the top, able to supplement things like that Moltres Galar that's hovering around there at tier 80 that I am absolutely terrified of, and some of those other heavy hitters and breakers, things like the Cinccino and the Tauros that I know he's going to be relying on more than maybe the average person would be. He's got decent hazards, a little bit light on removal here too, maybe relying on the Eldegoss a little bit for that. He's okay on priority too, and a little bit light on momentum. But honestly, I just see value pick after value pick. That was definitely his goal in this draft. Considering his recent success, I can't say no to his strategy. Steve, what do you see about the stats here?
The stats are definitely reflecting kind of that average bulk you were seeing with the third highest defense and special defense, and pretty average HP. So lots of bulk there. The offensive stats are average, or in the case of special attack, lowest average in the league. But a lot of that is that his off-attacking stats generally aren't good. Tauros, for example, 40 special attack, and it doesn't use it. So it brings the average pretty far down, but it really doesn't mean anything. All in all, looking very good there. For his speed tiers, pretty good spacing throughout. 115 and 110 at the top with those first two normal picks. A little bit of a gap down to 90 for the Moltres Galar. And from there, 85, 75, 65, 60, 45, and a couple other slow mons. Very, 10 points difference throughout, a couple of 15s. Again, that kind of 90 to 110 gap. In a normal league, I'd be kind of worried about that. But in this league where there's very few threats actually in that speed gap. I wouldn't be too concerned about it. So all in all, there's a speed gap, but it's in probably an okay area for this format, and he has the speed in other areas to compensate.
I definitely agree. Seeing some of these other stats here, other things that come out aside from just the numbers, seeing Water Bubble boosting water moves in Araquanid, even if it has low base attack. See the skill link on Cinccino transforming that 95 attack with the very high suddenly base power moves, the sheer force of Tauros. There are some other things at play here that maybe Chad will be able to work around compared to just the numbers there. Michael, what do we see about the overall type matchups?
He's got a lot of types he needs to watch out for. He's got weaknesses to fighting, fire, flying, rock, and steel, which aren't particularly well covered. Just a couple more beyond that he's pretty neutral against. But definitely, especially looking at the fighting, fire, flying right next to each other. He's got 4 weaknesses to each of them. Only 2 resists to fire and flying, and 3 to fighting. Those are pretty common offensive types. So we'll see how he's able to cover against.
Yeah, definitely down here. Again, he went, I think, more so for value than that type synergy. We'll see if that ends up costing him at all or not. Overall, though, I just have to say classic Chad. This is a Chad team for sure if I've ever seen one. Not sure he's going to pick up Volcarona midseason this time, but I'm sure he'll find a way. Steve, what do you have to say?
I certainly agree, classic Chad. Especially, very clear in his first round Tauros, just speed and offense. Has a little bit of utility as well, but that's what Chad wants, something that, is fast, hits hard, and then later on picked up the kind of bulky pieces to switch into. Same as he had in the previous seasons where, he had his offensive threat that hit, and they switched into his Corviknight Chansey. Doesn't quite have Corviknight Chansey, but, some of the pieces, Slowking, Galar, Rhydon, Moltres Galar, Klefki, they could certainly try and take their place and even fight back.
And Michael, anything else to wrap up Chad's draft here?
I think it's going to be really interesting how this draft strategy pays out for him. I had been thinking of a similar thing, go for a real good Pokemon in the middle values because, you can make stuff work with whatever is left at the top. There was so much there compared to, a normal draft where, after the first round, there's pretty slim pickings of the top tiers. But it's going to be interesting. It's either it's going to come together and it's going to work, or it's just not, I think. So we'll see which it is.
Definitely curious to see how often he brings those mid-lower tier mons that he valued so highly at the beginning of the draft. Will be very fun to watch. Speaking of fun to watch, maybe the big surprise from last season, the number 9 overall pick is Stevie, the coach of the newly named Baltimore Oricorios. Love the new logo. That is very sick. Very much love it. And of course the fire flying type, which matches his Talonflame that he picked in round 1. The very, very fast bird, which with maybe a little lower offensive stats than you may like, but a little more utility and the ability to have Gale Wings priority, as well as some potential bulky sets with things like Will-O-Wisp. I've had my eye on Talonflame in a few drafts here, and he's able to snag that as his first pick. Going down the list, we see it followed up by Uxie, Corsola, Galar, Rhyperior, Appleton, Magneton, Poliwrath, Absol, Haunter, Mawile, and Dottler. So this actually ended up being much more of a bulky team than was expected from the Talonflame pick there, which really stands head and shoulders above just about everything else in terms of just pure speed. Now I end up seeing a lot of bulk and a lot of pivoting up top to help set up for some of the other offensive pieces that if he get them in at the right times can help to break. As we see at the bottom, those couple pieces, the Absol, the Haunter, if he can get them in, it can actually break just about as well as anything else, similar to what maybe Chad is looking for, but with this maybe a little more of the momentum piece in there, things like Talonflame, things like Magneton, being able to swap in and out a little bit more effectively. Really like that Uxie pick there too, to provide a ton of defense and the ability to pivot around. He's got a healthy hazard setup here too, lots of different ways to get up those rocks and others. We see decent priority as well from the Talonflame, decent momentum, as we said, kind of looks like that could be end up being core to his game plan, but very light on removal. I see just that Talonflame there and wonder if that will end up being a big problem for him down the road. What are we looking at with stats then, Steve?
So looking at the stats here, they're actually, on average, bad compared to the rest of the league. It's kind of surprising looking at, but the defense is in the top 50%. Everything else is in the bottom 50%. Lowest average speed, second worst average attack, second worst special defense. But a lot of it's made up through the different utility, as well as many of these mons are not fully evolved and plan to take advantage of EVO to kind of supplement that bulk. Looking at the speed tiers, we also see a lot of gaps here. Talonflame, of course, one of the faster mons, 126. And then we have a 30-point gap down to the 95s of Haunter and Uxie. And then another 20-point gap down to 75, a couple 70s, another 20-point gap down to 50, 40, and 30s. Very much gaps here that could be exploited. We'll see if anyone is able to do so, especially worried about the overall speed. Outside of Talonflame, only having 95 as the highest leaves you open to just not getting to attack, continuously taking hits after hit. So we'll see if he has some options to mitigate these speed concerns.
We'll see if maybe he can keep up the pressure. We see a couple of exploitable weaknesses. Tell me there's some good news down in the typings then, Michael.
Well, at least on paper there are. I think this might be a little bit of kind of the opposite of the Incineroar, where you got a lot of resistances to a lot of things. Only a slight net weakness in Dark, a pretty substantial net weakness in Ghost, but that's probably one of the hardest ones to prevent. Then only two other types he's net neutral against with his weaknesses and resists. But, you know, he's got a huge Dark and Ghost weakness, coming from the Corsola Galler, the Uxie, the Haunter, the Dottler, all four of those being weak to both Dark and Ghost. And, you know, his resist to those, not necessarily the greatest. I mean, Mawile has a fantastic defensive typing, but not necessarily the stats to always back that up. Absol, a valuable Dark and Ghost resist, but not really bulky. So I think it'll be really interesting to see if, you know, he can make his resists really work for him.
I see some type resist berries potentially in the future here to mitigate a couple of these weaknesses. Other than that, honestly, pretty decent overall. Hopefully can help make that work a little bit. So from top to bottom, we see a lot of exploitable weaknesses, but a lot of things I think that are still going for him pretty well. A lot of strength. I see that Magneton down there. Ooh, I wish I could have picked that up. That would have been a really nice hit there. Uxie and Corsola, we've harped on the Ghost and Dark weaknesses, but those two are such big, bulky walls. So if you don't have that strong Ghost or Dark attack, or if he's able to work around that somehow, those are going to be painful to try to break through. Steve, what do you see coming out from this team?
I'm glad you mentioned the Magneton, because that way I can talk about the other mon I really like, being Haunter. There are a couple of the Tier 4Es that, you know, are just kind of outshined by other mons. Haunter and Kadabra really come to mind. But in this more limited format, I believe they are quite value picks that are going to put in a lot of work. Haunter having, you know, more or less the same move pool as Gengar, which has all sorts of options, and then still having, you know, a base 95 speed and 115 special attack. Very usable, and excited to see what it's able to do, especially considering it still gets that ability to levitate that Gengar lost.
Gengar only wishes it was as good as Haunter. Michael, what else do you have to say about Stevie's team?
Yeah, I think it'll be really, really interesting. I expect to see Weakness Policy Rhyperior do some serious work in at least one match. Maybe even a Weakness Policy Uxie, because, you know, if he's got that exploitable weakness, but he does have so much bulk, you know, you can find a way to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. If anything is designed to do that, it sure feels like it would be Uxie. And now we're going to move on to the number 10 overall pick. Well, what a surprise. It's the Row 1 Birbs, coached by Michael here. So your first pick was Flygon. And I really like seeing Flygon here. I'm surprised it was dropped all the way down to the 10th overall pick, but glad you're able to snag that up. The stats don't look impressive just looking at the surface, but honestly, having a lot of just overall Bulk, depending on what you want to invest in. Having the speed of 100, actually pretty valuable here. 100 attack, actually pretty nice with the high base power moves you've got. A very nice move pool. I really, really like Flygon. And moving down the rest of the list, we see Vaporeon, Charizard, Gallade, Lycanroc Midday, Alcremie, Sandslash, Alola, which you're valuing quite highly, the Raichu, the Shuckle, Liepard, and Swoobat. What stands out to me overall, I think, is speedy offense and friends is kind of how I would like to put this. I see a lot of higher speed mons here and some excellent supplements to that. The ones that stand out to me, Flygon Vaporeon is probably my favorite 1-2 combo out of tier 100 from any of the coaches here. They don't cover each other's weaknesses perfectly, but the little bit that they do and the synergy that they have to be able to swap between each other, U-turn, flip turn, wish for one, the offense from the other, really, really nice synergy overall there. Really love it. I see the bulk. I see the pivoting. This is honestly too good up there at the top. We've got kind of mediocre hazards here, just one or two little bits here. We've got pretty decent removal though too, depending on what you want to try to slot it onto. We've got, honestly, the two best parts that I see here are the amazing priority options along with the speed and some excellent momentum, probably even able to best out my own that I was able to accumulate here. And I already mentioned the U-turn, see the flip turn. We see Raichu being able to volt switch about or U-turn about as it likes. Really nice overall. They're maybe leaning a little on this Sandslash Alola, but honestly, if we look past just Slush Rust, there's a little bit more there, I think, that we're still waiting to see from a honestly excellent Steel type. Might I remind you how rare that is to find in this kind of format, and with this kind of bulk, these kinds of stats, these kinds of hazards and removal. So top to bottom, really like the squad. That Gallade standing out at tier 80, really nice pickup there too. Steve, what do the stats say about Michael's team?
The stats reflect the speed you mentioned, having the second highest average speed, as well as lots of special bulk. The rest of the stats are kind of middling, but they each have certain members that shine. Of average HP, rather low overall, but the Vaporeon with the base 130 HP kind of carrying that and being able to wish past other members can kind of mitigate their lower HP and heal them up fully. Get that Shuckle with its 20 base HP up to 100% from one. Great options there. Regarding the speed tiering, a little bit of clumping at the top with 114 from Swoobat, 112, 110, 106, and 2 100s. 6 Mons at 100 or above. Really is going to open up some of the lower speed gaps. 20-point gap down to 80 for the Gallade. 15-point gap down to a couple 65s and a 64 for Alcremie. And then a huge jump down to 5 for Shuckle. Overall, tons of speed options, and then, of course, the priority to boot off of that. With all the speed, though, opponents will be able to invest a little more in bulk on the slower Mons who won't necessarily have a chance to outspeed anything anyways.
Yeah, wonderful. Good to see that Trick Room Glade or not with such high speed stats. Michael, what do you see about your typings overall? How are you able to fill that out?
Didn't do the best, didn't do terribly, but, I do have some weaknesses to Electric, Fairy, Ghost, Rock, and Water that I didn't answer particularly well, and there are several other types that look fairly spammable against me. Definitely think that the could definitely find myself getting blown apart by some particular types, but I might be aware of this and might be planning to fix that with a couple trades. So we'll see if it stays that way.
Very interesting. I do like the team top to bottom though. Either way, I think speedy offense and friends is a pretty good way to describe what I'm seeing going on here. Able to get in some of those key threats against things that you can outspeed and just hit. It seems like you're going to end up trading very favorably overall is kind of the goal that I am seeing here from the squad. Steve, what do you think about the team?
Overall, fantastic team. Lots of great pieces. Excited to see Lycanroc Midday. The previous time it was in the league, it was kind of outshone by Lycanroc Dusk that was picked from the beginning and played by a better player, Todd Joey. But Lycanroc Midday, especially in this more limited format, is really going to shine. Nacelle Rock is so good with the big rock weakness a lot of people have, and the ability to just have a priority rock move to clean up is going to be huge.
Nacelle Rock is pretty good, I hear. Michael, give us some of your thoughts on your team. I know you mentioned a transaction or two, but how are you feeling about it?
I'm pretty excited by it. Definitely don't see this as necessarily the final form, but the ability with to break and clean with a lot of different mons. Flygon, Sandslash, Gallade, Charizard, Lycanroc, maybe even a Swoobat. I think there's a lot of fun opportunities I could make for myself. We'll see if I'm actually able to capitalize it. And like Steve said, passing a Vaporeon Wish to a Shuckle sounds like just about the most obnoxious thing you can do in Pokemon.
I'm ready to see some funny things happen from the team, for sure. I'll move on to the 11th overall pick, second from the end here, and Zach and his Summit County Psyducks, who picked Salazzle with his first round pick. Definitely a mon that I'm surprised we haven't been able to see more of. This is a very unique pick. Obviously, Corrosion is such an interesting ability with the ability to play very defensively despite poor defensive stats, as well as the just 117 speed and 111 special attack with very strong stab moves to back that up. So super interesting first overall pick there. Love to see it. We've also got Duraludon, Boltund, Mantine, Scrafty, Golisopod, Aggron, Claydol, Leafeon, Rapidash, Galar, and Persian. I see a lot of great value picks here and a lot of just overall balance. I see some great fast threats near the top, and I see some really nice balanced threats there too. The Salazzle and Boltund near the top. I've played with Mantine before. This thing is a little more obnoxious than you're giving it credit for. Good luck breaking through that giant special defense stat. Duraludon, the newcomer to Unite, is of course a fantastic pick. Very strong Steel type and Dragon type, which are both tough to find in this kind of format, and a lot of cool, interesting supplements all the way down. I see things like Golisopod really helping that out. The Persian at the bottom, very cool pick. Rapidash Gallery, we were able to see a lot of from Season 8 and chose not to raise its value. We'll see if we were mistaken on that. Steve, what do the stats tell you?
The stats are telling me defense, first of all. I would just like to take a moment to highlight the defense. There are so many defensive pieces on this team. The average defense being above 100, carried by the likes of Duraludon, Scrafty, Golisopod, Aggron, Claydol, Leafeon, all sorts of defensive pieces. And with the more physical league in general, with most of the key special attackers not allowed this season, all this physical bulk very much could lead to some wins. It's not backed up by the largest HP stats, but again, the physical bulk can carry that. Also, fast. Very fast team overall, highest average in the league, with pretty good speed tiers too. 121, 117, 115, 105, 95, 85, 75, 70, 58, 50, 40. Looking through, there's just gaps of 10 all around. Pretty consistently gaps of 10. Sure, there's a little bit low from 70 to 58, but at that point, the mons generally aren't as invested in speed. So that gap's 12, that's fine. Outside of that, 121 being the fastest, that's pretty fast. There are a couple faster in the format, but not many. So all in all, fantastic speed, fantastic speed gaps. Really hard to find anything to exploit here.
It seems rather meticulously crafted from a lot of perspectives that we've seen so far. Is that reflected in the typing as well, Michael?
Oh, for sure. This is the only team that has no net weaknesses to any type. Every type, there are at least as many resists and immunities as there are weaknesses, which is a very impressive feat. And even not too many types that he comes up net neutral against. I think there are a couple types that look relatively spammable. Dark, Dragon, Fire, Ghost. Not having a ton of answers to them, but he doesn't have a bunch of weaknesses to him either. So not necessarily a problem for him.
I think I'll go back to word meticulously crafted. This is a solid team top to bottom. I don't see anything that particularly jumps out at me as, wow, this is very good or very strong. But there's nothing here to exploit in particular. As you said, very well crafted speed tiers, very well crafted team balance on defense. Even got some pretty nice hazards, hazard removal, momentum, decent priority. It's just solid all the way around. Perhaps this will just come down to the skill of the coach, and we've seen from Zach before, he is a Season 5 champion, so maybe if he's going to even out the matchups a little bit, he's going to come out on top more than we're expecting. Steve, what do you see?
I agree. This looks like a very well-made, meticulous team. Excited to see Duraludon go to work. When it first came out, it was thought to be quite good, and it slowly dropped. Right now, it's in Tier 100 for us. I know I was looking at it, again, for that Steel Dragon typing and the options it'll bring. Very excited to see how it performs both in the league and in Pokemon Unite.
Anything else from you, Michael?
I think this team is pretty is a bit of a question mark in my mind. I agree with you guys that it's incredibly well put together, but I don't look at it and immediately, recognize, what am I afraid of? What am I preparing for against this team? So, I'm excited to see, what he ends up really making work the most for him throughout the season.
Perhaps those little surprises he can find out then will be the difference maker. As we said, nothing really jumps off the page as outstanding, but nothing too bad either. And with that, we're going to move on to the final pick. Well, would you look at that? It's our two-time defending champion Newport Noctowls, coached by Jimmy. And his first pick was the Decidueye up at the top in Tier 100, the Grass Ghost type. Solid offensive stats, the ability to boost physical or special attack. Very scary, honestly, and that ghost type that continuously comes up as being very difficult to prepare against. We saw it with Steve picking the Chandelure early, too. Decidueye kind of tackles that in a very different way, not being quite as threatening off the bat as Chandelure, but being able to be scary in a variety of different ways. A lot of interesting utility there. You also see the Noivern, Aromatisse, Blaziken, Mudsdale, Pincurchin, Raichu Alola, which is a very nice pairing with that Pincurchin, Kangaskhan, Lapras, Berserker, and Thievul down at the bottom. I see a nice balanced offense team here overall. This is pretty good Jimmy style, maybe a little bit more offensive than we may be expecting from him, but very nice balanced pivoting, setup, and tanking all available at the top. Noivern very much embodies a lot of what this team is about. It can be a little bulky and defensive with a really nice defensive typing when it is most needed. It can set up a little bit, but mostly it's there to pivot around and just drop, say, a Draco and then move along, get some information with Frisk. That's kind of what I see from the team, able to go into, say, Blaziken, who can fire off something like an Overheater or Close Combat, and then you turn out into the next threat. This is, I think, peak balance. I see a lot of very, very good threats here. I see that Kangaskhan down at the bottom that I was pining for a little bit. I know that with multiple people were looking at that Pincurchin as a very bulky piece with some surprisingly good offensive utility. Well-rounded team. I don't see too many issues, but maybe we'll be able to see something with the stats, Steve. What you got?
The stats are overall looking very good. Top 4 in HP, attack, special attack, and special defense. A little lackluster in the defense with the second lowest average, as well as the speed being in the bottom half. But overall, very solid. The speed tiers themselves, a little bit of grouping. 123 at the top with Noivern, very good. 110 with Raichu Alola. A gap down to 90 for Thievul and Kangaskhan. Again, the 110 to 90 gap might not be so bad in this. We'll see how it plays out. And then from there, every 10, 80, 70, 60, 50, and then 35, 29, 15. Honestly, going all the way down to 15 with pretty decent speed gaps. Very good. Everything has something it needs to outspeed. Very consistent spacing with 10. It's like Pokemon favors multiples of 10 in stats. I'm not sure why or how that could be, but seems to be the case. But yeah, nothing here to really exploit.
Very impressive. What do we see about typings then, Michael?
Typings are pretty solid overall. We've got a big weakness to ground with 4 weaknesses, and then only the Dekidui resist and the Noivern immunity, as well as general weakness to fairy with not a whole lot to protect him from that. But overall, it's pretty solid. Fighting and ice relationships he has some big weaknesses and some big resists to each of those. So I definitely think he'll need to be careful about managing a lot of those weaknesses and resistances, but he's got a solid enough base to start.
Fair enough. And again, it looks like just all over the place. To see a lot of good balance. Maybe a little bit weak in the hazards and removal game, and maybe only decent priority, but awesome momentum to get into the different pieces he needs. Solid from top to bottom. Seems like a potential to three-peat here. What do you think, Steve?
There's definitely the potential, and Jimmy has shown fantastic skill, and throughout his time playing in the league. So would not surprise me at all. Really excited to see if again we see kind of a lower tier pairing of Mons dominate. And previously it was your Hail Core, but I'm excited to see if the Pincurchin Ritualola Electric Terrain Core has a similar effect as we saw before. Really interesting to see, and if so, we might have to really evaluate and just increase the pricing on anything that sets weather or terrain.
And as we said at the beginning, we're at a premium here for weather setters, not too many, and I don't think anyone picked anything when we only see these two terrain setters, just the Pincurchin and the Thwacky from Joey. Maybe this will end up being a little too strong, I wonder. It's about the only thing that we have to judge that on. Michael, anything else before we wrap up the final team?
Yeah, I definitely think it is scary. The Ritual, like you said, with the electric terrain. Pincurchin also hits hard by itself in electric terrain. And then you've got Noivern with fast frisking U-turns as well as great stabs. Decidueye I hadn't been looking at too hard, but as a number one pick for him, it definitely is going to be able to do some work. And Mudsdale too. I think there's a lot of Pokemon here that are going to put in a lot of work over the season.
And with that said, we're going to be starting the season here pretty soon. With the draft finished, week 1 will be coming up shortly. Before we get to that, we want to kind of get a little bit of a general idea of what we think we're expecting from the league, and maybe a hot take or two here, right? Who do we think is going to end up performing well? I guess I could start off and by saying, yes, we see maybe a dearth of special attackers, but I think that's going to make that stat all the more important. Very excited to see what kind of things we come up with Assault Vests. I know a weakness policy has been tossed around here or there, but I think type resist barriers are going to be at a premium here too, with way fewer answers to Mons. I think we could see some things a little bit more specialized one way or another to be able to take something. And I don't know how much of the hot take from how much I was able to praise it before, but I really like Zach's team overall. I think the meticulous nature with which he's gone over his team, reaching out to others a little bit more too. I wonder if maybe this is a season that he's going to be investing in just a little bit more than previous seasons, and we're going to see him bounce back after a pretty poor showing in Season 8. This is a previous champion. I like the team top to bottom. Curious to see what kinds of tricks he has up his sleeves, and if he plays solidly, this is a team that could take him very far. Steve, do you have any general thoughts and or interesting picks for us to look at throughout the season?
So I'm going to start with the interesting pick that I will do better than I've done in the past 2 seasons. Not very interesting, but, a personal goal. Looking at the league as a whole, though, I think this format will really emphasize certain Pokemon that may not even be clear to us at this point. But I think by the halfway point of the season, there will be a couple standout Pokemon that none of us saw as being big. Perhaps the coach did as they drafted them. But I feel there's going to be something that surprises us. And we sit here at the halfway point being like, how did this get drafted, in the 4th or 5th round? This Pokemon is clearly so strong in this format. Really looking forward to finding out what those Pokemon are.
It'll be interesting to see how coaches adapt at that halfway point to see if maybe we get some transactions in response to some of those big picks. Michael, anything else that you would like to talk about the season in general, and maybe a coach or two you want to highlight?
Oh, definitely 100%. I think, you've done a good talk about, a lot of the coaches. I definitely think this format is going to be very skill heavy in how you are able to analyze your matchup, how you're able to protect your win conditions and take down your opponents. So I think we will probably see a lot of the coaches who have done very well in the past do very well again. But I do have a bit of a hot take that I think kind of piggybacking off what you and Steve were talking about, there are going to be some sleeper picks that are going to do absolutely insane amounts of work, and I'm going to take it one step farther than that, and I think there's going to be at least one, maybe more than one coach that, has a pretty weak start to the season, but then something clicks, they make a couple of trades, and all of a sudden their season is going to completely turn around as they see something others just didn't.
Yeah, we've seen this happen once or twice. I know they stand out for me is when Chad ended up starting a season 0-4 and then did not drop a game again until the finals. If you say that it's going to be more likely the low tiers, I definitely believe you. Just hoping not to be exposed down here in the high skill intensity that we're expecting low tiers to be. So that's going to wrap up the post-draft analysis. If you made it through the end, we appreciate you for watching. Thank you goes out to Steve and Michael for joining me, again, as always, and sitting through this giant slog of a video. But hey, was a lot of fun. I had a blast going through all the different teams and coaches, and if you went through this too, maybe you're going to end up getting a leg up too in your next league. We'll see what kind of content we can get available for you, as Week 1 is coming up soon. But until then, we'll see you next time.